Welcome to Midnight Affairs, where secrets unravel, desires ignite, and bold stories keep you on the edge. Tonight begins Chapter 1, our very first story where passion meets betrayal in the most gripping way. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. The dim light of the living room flickered as the clock ticked past midnight. John sat quietly in the corner, his heart pounding like a drum. The soft hum of the hidden cameras he had installed a week ago was almost drowned out by the sound of his breathing. He had hesitated at first, wondering if he was being paranoid, but something in his gut had urged him to act. As the screen in front of him began to light up with live footage, John's worst fears came to life. There she was, his wife of 10 years, leaning close to a man he had never seen before. Their laughter filled the air, careless and free, while John's world started to crumble. The betrayal was more than he could process at that moment, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about their marriage anymore. This was about what he would do next. The shadows in the room seemed to grow thicker, wrapping around him like a storm. A choice lay ahead, and John knew his response would change everything. With the weight of the truth pressing on him, John made a decision that would leave the world watching. John had always been the reliable one. In his mid-30s, he exuded a quiet strength that made people trust him instantly. Raised in a modest household, John had witnessed his parents working tirelessly to provide for their family. His father, a factory worker, often came home with grease-streaked hands, while his mother managed the house with unwavering discipline. They taught John two key principles: hard work and loyalty. These lessons stayed with him, shaping his personality and his vision for the future. When John met Lisa at a friend's party, it felt like fate. Lisa was everything John admired: intelligent, witty, and beautiful. She carried herself with an air of confidence, her laughter filling every room she entered. Despite her outgoing nature, there was a softness to her, a vulnerability that tugged at John's heart. Lisa had grown up in a world of material abundance but emotional scarcity. Her parents, successful business owners, were often away, leaving Lisa to navigate her teenage years with little guidance or warmth. Lisa saw John as her anchor, someone who could provide the stability she had always craved. He in turn was drawn to her vibrancy and charm. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and before long they were inseparable. Friends envied their bond, calling them the perfect couple. To outsiders, their life seemed idyllic: a beautiful home, successful careers, and a shared dream of building a family. But as time passed, life's demands began to weigh on their marriage. John, ever the provider, threw himself into his work as an IT specialist. His job required long hours and frequent late nights, which he justified as a means to secure their future. Lisa, however, saw things differently. She felt neglected, her emotional needs left unmet. Lisa had always been someone who thrived on attention and connection. With John increasingly absent, she sought companionship elsewhere. At first in the form of friends, yoga classes, and volunteering. But none of these filled the growing void in her heart. Her loneliness became unbearable, a constant ache that followed her even in a room full of people. It was during one of these lonely afternoons at a cafe that she met Mark. He was charismatic and attentive, with an easy smile that made her feel seen. Mark worked as a freelance photographer, a profession that allowed him the freedom and flexibility John's rigid schedule didn't. Their conversation started innocently enough, discussions about art, travel, and life's little pleasures. But soon their texts grew more frequent, their meetings more intimate. Lisa found herself drawn to Mark's carefree spirit. Unlike John, he was spontaneous, often suggesting unplanned adventures or sharing poetic musings about life. Mark made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She knew it was wrong, but her need for affection overpowered her guilt. Meanwhile, John began noticing subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. She was more guarded with her phone, often smiling at messages she wouldn't share. She started dressing differently, paying extra attention to her appearance even for casual outings. At first, John brushed off his suspicions, convincing himself that he was overthinking. But the unease grew, gnawing at him like a splinter he couldn't remove. One night, while Lisa was in the shower, John noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. His heart raced as he glanced at the screen, which displayed a message from M. The words were brief but suggestive enough to confirm his worst fears. He felt a rush of anger, sadness, and betrayal all at once. But John didn't confront Lisa right away. He needed proof, something undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of. After days of sleepless nights and countless internet searches, he decided to install hidden cameras around the house. It wasn't an easy decision. John wrestled with the morality of spying on his wife, knowing it was a breach of trust in its own right. But his desperation for answers outweighed his doubts. The cameras were small, discreetly placed in areas Lisa frequented. John told himself it was the only way to uncover the truth. Each day he checked the footage, dreading what he might find. Behind closed doors, their lives were anything but ordinary. The secrets they kept would soon unravel, changing everything they thought they knew about each other. As John began reviewing the footage from the hidden cameras, his heart sank deeper with each passing day. At first there was nothing alarming, just Lisa going about her daily routine. She worked on her laptop, made dinner, and watched her favorite TV shows. But then one evening John noticed a subtle change. Lisa's demeanor shifted. She seemed distracted, frequently checking her phone and smiling at the screen. 2 days later, John's worst fears were confirmed. The camera in the living room captured Lisa sitting on the couch, her face lighting up as Mark entered the house. John watched in stunned silence as Mark leaned in to kiss her. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was a reality staring back at him through the screen. What seemed thrilling in the moment for Lisa and Mark was quickly spiraling into a web of secrecy and risk. Lisa's choice to bring Mark into their shared home added a new layer of danger to their affair. The house, once a sanctuary for John and Lisa's love, was now the backdrop of their crumbling marriage. Mark, too, was taking risks. Though he appeared carefree and confident, he knew the stakes of their actions. He had no illusions about how things could go if John found out. Yet, the allure of being with Lisa outweighed his sense of caution. The thrill of their secret meetings clouded his judgment, leading him to ignore the potential fallout. John's initial reaction to the footage was a mix of rage and heartbreak. He felt as though his world had shattered. But instead of confronting Lisa immediately, he made a calculated decision to wait. He needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal before taking any action. Over the next week, John continued to gather evidence. He pieced together their timeline, noting when Mark would arrive and leave. The betrayal deepened with every recorded interaction. Shared laughter, lingering touches, whispered words of affection. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Lisa, oblivious to John's discovery, carried on with her double life. She felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. Every meeting with Mark was like a stolen moment from a storybook romance, but when she was alone, the weight of her choices began to press down on her. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the emotional void in her marriage seemed to justify her actions. The stakes were escalating in ways Lisa didn't fully comprehend. John's silence wasn't a sign of ignorance but a growing storm. He began planning his next steps, considering everything from confrontation to legal action. The thought of divorce felt like an admission of failure, but staying in the marriage without addressing the betrayal seemed equally unbearable. Meanwhile, Mark started to sense the precariousness of their situation. His initial thrill at being with Lisa began to wane, replaced by a nagging sense of paranoia. Every sound at the door made him jump, and every glance from a stranger felt like a judgment. He began questioning whether Lisa was worth the risk. The cracks in their affair began to show. Lisa noticed Mark pulling away, his texts growing shorter and his excuses for missed meetings piling up. She tried to hold on, but the tension between them was undeniable. For John, the stakes reached a boiling point one evening when he reviewed the day's footage. Mark had entered their home again, but this time, Lisa handed him a small box, a gift. The sight of Lisa smiling as she watched Mark open the box pushed John over the edge. He realized that their affair wasn't just a fling, it was something deeper. As John stared at the screen, he made his decision. The time for silently observing was over. What had started as a suspicion had grown into a storm of emotions: betrayal, anger, and an overwhelming need for justice. With every passing moment, the tension mounted, threatening to unravel the lives they had so carefully constructed. With each passing day, the air in the household grew heavier, as if the unspoken truths were solidifying into invisible walls. John, now armed with irrefutable evidence of the affair, wrestled with how to confront Lisa. Every glance at her felt like a test of his composure. How could she sit across from him at dinner, acting as though nothing had changed? Lisa, unaware of the storm brewing inside John, began to notice subtle changes in his demeanor. He was quieter, more distant. When she asked if everything was all right, he would dismiss her concerns with a tight smile. This growing chasm between them only deepened her internal conflict. She began questioning the affair, wondering if Mark was truly worth the risk of tearing her marriage apart. Meanwhile, Mark was growing increasingly reckless. His once stealthy visits to the house became more frequent, and his confidence in their secrecy bordered on arrogance. On one occasion he left a jacket behind. Lisa, panicked, stuffed it into the back of her closet before John could notice. Or so she thought. John found the jacket during one of his quiet investigations of the house. It was a brand he didn't own, and it smelled faintly of cologne he didn't use. Holding it in his hands, his anger flared. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a violation of the life they had built together. The tension in their lives began to attract attention. Lisa's best friend, Sarah, started to notice her distracted behavior and asked if everything was all right. Lisa, desperate to keep her secret, brushed off the concern, but Sarah wasn't convinced. One evening, when Sarah stopped by unannounced, she found Lisa visibly anxious. "What's going on, Lisa? You've been acting strange for weeks," Sarah pressed. "It's nothing. Work has just been overwhelming," Lisa replied, avoiding eye contact. But Sarah wasn't easily fooled. She began to dig deeper, her protective instincts pushing her to uncover the truth. At the same time, Mark's life was unraveling in his own way. He had lied to his co-workers about where he spent his evenings, and his increasingly erratic behavior started raising eyebrows. One colleague, curious about Mark's secretive nature, followed him one evening and saw him enter John and Lisa's home. The walls were closing in tighter with every move. John, still struggling with how to confront Lisa, began documenting everything. He saved clips from the hidden cameras and made notes about their interactions. His focus on gathering evidence began to consume him, leaving him distant from his friends and family. The turning point came one evening when John, exhausted from his emotional turmoil, decided to confront Lisa indirectly. As they sat in the living room, he casually mentioned, "You've been spending a lot of time on your phone lately. Everything okay?" Lisa froze for a moment before forcing a laugh. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." But her voice betrayed her, and John's piercing gaze made her squirm. "I do know how it is," John replied cryptically, his tone laced with an edge that Lisa couldn't ignore. That night, Lisa texted Mark in a panic, urging him to be more cautious. Mark, already feeling the strain, dismissed her concerns. "You're overthinking. He doesn't know anything," he replied. But Lisa's gut told her otherwise. The once thrilling affair now felt like a ticking time bomb. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Sarah, still suspicious, decided to confront Lisa directly. "Lisa, I know something's going on. You can tell me," she said, her tone firm but compassionate. Lisa, cornered and overwhelmed, broke down in tears. She confessed everything, Mark, the affair, and her fear that John might know. Sarah, stunned and disappointed, urged Lisa to come clean before things spiraled further. Unbeknownst to both women, John had overheard their conversation from the hallway. His hands trembled as he clutched the recording device he had brought with him, intending to gather more evidence. With every secret exposed, the fragile balance holding their lives together was on the verge of collapse. In one moment, everything John thought he knew about his life was shattered. Standing in the hallway, he clutched the recording device tighter, his mind reeling from Lisa's tearful confession. Her words echoed in his ears, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. The rawness of her admission left no room for doubt. She had betrayed him, not only with her actions but also with the facade she had maintained for months. John felt the weight of anger, sadness, and betrayal swell within him, threatening to consume his ability to think clearly. His first instinct was to burst into the room and confront them both, Lisa for her betrayal and Sarah for knowing but not telling him. But something stopped him. Instead, he retreated quietly, retreating to his home office, where he played the conversation back on his recorder, as if hearing it again would make it less real. Lisa, meanwhile, sat on the couch with Sarah, her face buried in her hands. The relief of confessing her secret was short-lived, replaced by the dread of facing John. Sarah, trying to offer support, asked, "Do you think he knows? Have you noticed anything off about him?" Lisa shook her head. "He's been distant, but I thought it was work stress." "No, I'm not so sure. What are you going to do?" Sarah asked softly. I don't know. I can't lose him, Sarah. I need to find a way to fix this, Lisa replied, her voice cracking with desperation. But the damage was already done. Confrontation. The next morning, John decided it was time to face the truth head-on. He waited until Lisa was sipping her morning coffee at the kitchen table, her hair still tousled from sleep. Without a word, he placed the hidden camera footage on the table between them. Lisa's eyes widened as she stared at the USB drive. She knew instantly what it was. John, what is this? You tell me, he replied coldly, his voice devoid of the warmth she once took for granted. Her hands trembled as she reached for the drive. I don't understand. Stop lying, Lisa, John snapped, his composure finally cracking. I know everything. The texts. The late nights. The affair. Lisa's breath hitched and tears filled her eyes. John, please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I trusted you. I built a life with you and you threw it all away for him. The raw emotion in his voice silenced her. Lisa broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, John. I never meant for it to get this far. I was stupid and selfish and I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do anything to make it right. John stared at her, his heart warring between love and fury. Part of him wanted to forgive her, to salvage the life they had built together. But another part of him couldn't ignore the betrayal. Fallout. Word of the affair spread quickly. Sarah, torn between loyalty to Lisa and her own morals, distanced herself from the situation. Mark, realizing the mess he had caused, disappeared from Lisa's life without so much as an apology. Lisa tried everything to win John back. Counseling, heartfelt letters, even leaving her job to prove her commitment to their marriage. But John couldn't shake the image of her betrayal. Every time he looked at her, he saw not the woman he married but the woman who had lied to him. After weeks of trying, John made his decision. One evening he handed Lisa an envelope. Inside was a legal separation agreement. Lisa's hands trembled as she read the document. Is this really what you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I want anymore, John admitted. But I know I can't keep living like this. I need time. Space. Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had no one to blame but herself. Moving forward. The weeks following their separation were a blur of pain and self-reflection for both of them. John threw himself into work, using the distraction to process his emotions. Lisa sought therapy, desperate to understand why she had made the choices that led to her downfall. One day, as John scrolled through his social media feed, he came across a video that had gone viral. It was a clip from one of his hidden cameras showing Mark sneaking into their home. The video, posted by a mutual acquaintance who had somehow gained access to it, was accompanied by a caption, "When karma comes knocking." John's heart sank. He had never intended for their private pain to become public entertainment. The video sparked a frenzy of online comments, some sympathetic, others cruel. Lisa, humiliated by the exposure, called John in tears. How could you let this happen? She demanded. I didn't post it, Lisa, he replied, his voice weary. But maybe now you'll understand the consequences of your actions. In the aftermath of betrayal, both John and Lisa were left to rebuild their lives, forever changed by the choices they had made. The cost of their choices was now impossible to ignore. As the viral video circulated, the fallout became inescapable. Lisa's once quiet life turned into a public spectacle. Strangers sent her hateful messages, former friends distanced themselves, and whispers of her betrayal followed her everywhere. At work, colleagues avoided eye contact, and Lisa felt the weight of their judgment in every meeting. It was as if her world had shrunk, suffocating her in the consequences of her own actions. John, too, found himself caught in the storm. While many sympathized with him, the unwanted attention disrupted his personal and professional life. Coworkers tried to offer support, but the pity in their eyes made him feel small. Social media notifications buzzed relentlessly, each one a reminder of the intimate betrayal now laid bare for all to see. But beyond the external chaos, the real conflict unfolded between John and Lisa. Their separation, though necessary, was fraught with tension and unresolved emotions. Every meeting to discuss logistics, splitting assets, handling bills, or managing shared responsibilities, was a minefield of unspoken words and simmering anger. Lisa's attempts at redemption. Lisa couldn't bear the thought of living with the stain of her betrayal. She threw herself into therapy, not only to understand her choices but also to confront the deep-seated insecurities that had driven her to seek validation elsewhere. I was lonely, she admitted during one session. John was always working, always busy. And instead of talking to him, I made the worst decision of my life. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. Her therapist, a calm and patient woman, encouraged Lisa to focus on accountability rather than self-pity. You can't undo what's been done, Lisa. But you can take responsibility and work toward becoming the person you want to be, whether John is in your life or not. Lisa began volunteering at a local shelter, hoping to channel her guilt into something meaningful. It didn't erase her mistakes, but it gave her a sense of purpose and a small measure of peace. John's struggle with forgiveness. For John, the path forward was less clear. Nights were the hardest. The silence of an empty home felt oppressive. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the betrayal lingered in his mind, a constant, gnawing presence. One evening, over drinks with his best friend, Eric, John voiced his internal conflict. Part of me hates her for what she did, but another part still loves her. Is that insane? Eric shook his head. It's not insane. You were married to her for years, John. Those feelings don't just disappear. But you need to figure out if you can live with what happened, or if it's better to let go. John didn't respond. Instead, he stared at his glass, the amber liquid reflecting the mess of emotions swirling within him. Mark's unexpected return. Just as the dust began to settle, Mark reappeared, seeking to clear his name, or so he claimed. He reached out to Lisa first, showing up at her apartment unannounced. You've ruined my life, Lisa hissed the moment she opened the door. Mark held up his hands defensively. I didn't post the video. I didn't want this any more than you did. Then why are you here? Lisa demanded, her voice shaking. To apologize, he said, his tone surprisingly sincere. And to warn you. John isn't just angry, he's out for revenge. He's hired a lawyer and he's digging into everything. Lisa's stomach dropped. She had expected anger, but not this level of retaliation. Escalation. John's lawyer, a sharp and relentless woman named Claire, had been gathering evidence to build a case against Lisa for emotional distress and potential damages. The video complicates things, Claire admitted during one of their meetings. It could be seen as an invasion of privacy, even if you didn't post it. We need to tread carefully. Despite Claire's warnings, John couldn't let go of his desire for justice, or perhaps vindication. He began to consider taking the legal battle further, exploring custody options for their dog, Max, and pushing for a larger share of their assets. Lisa, feeling cornered, decided to fight back. If he wants a war, I'll give him one, she told Sarah during a late-night phone call. Sarah hesitated. Lisa, are you sure that's the right move? This could get even uglier. It's already ugly, Lisa replied. I won't let him destroy what's left of my life. The tipping point. Tensions reached their peak during a court-mandated mediation session. The room buzzed with unspoken hostility as John and Lisa sat across from each other, flanked by their respective lawyers. I want the house, John stated firmly. And Max stays with me. Lisa clenched her fists. You can't just take everything, John. I made mistakes, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve a chance to rebuild. The mediator, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, tried to steer the conversation toward compromise. Let's focus on finding a solution that works for both of you. But neither side was willing to yield. The session ended in frustration, with both John and Lisa feeling more bitter and defeated than ever. A glimmer of resolution. After weeks of escalating conflict, something shifted. John received a handwritten letter from Lisa, delivered through his lawyer. In it, Lisa wrote, John, I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. I've let go of the house and Max because I realize they're not what I need to heal. I just hope someday you'll find peace, and maybe even happiness again. Lisa. The simplicity of her words struck a chord in John. It wasn't an apology meant to win him back. It was a genuine acknowledgement of her wrongs. For the first time, he felt the weight of his anger begin to lift. Final transition. As the dust began to settle, John and Lisa found themselves standing on the edges of their broken lives, unsure of what the future held but determined to move forward, separately yet forever shaped by their shared past. As the truth emerged, there was no turning back. The courtroom was packed, The atmosphere tense as John and Lisa faced each other for the last time. This wasn't just about dividing assets or deciding custody of Max. It was about closure, vindication, and the raw emotions that had built up over months of bitter conflict. Lisa's lawyer had uncovered a critical piece of evidence, a time-stamped video of Mark installing the hidden camera in John and Lisa's home. Though John had never admitted to sharing the footage, the revelation shifted the narrative. The evidence implicated Mark as the instigator, but it also placed John in a precarious legal position. "What did you expect to achieve, John?" Lisa's voice cracked as she broke the silence in the courtroom. "To humiliate me? To punish me? Haven't we both suffered enough?" John's jaw tightened. "You think this is just about punishment? You betrayed me, Lisa. You broke everything we built together. And then you ask for mercy?" Before Lisa could respond, the judge intervened, calling for order. The weight of their shared pain was palpable, echoing in every corner of the room. An unpredictable turn. Midway through the proceedings, Mark unexpectedly requested to testify. Taking the stand, he confessed, "I installed the cameras at Lisa's request. She said she felt unsafe and wanted to monitor the house. I didn't realize she was lying until everything blew up." The room fell silent, shock rippling through the audience. Lisa's face went pale. "That's a lie," she shouted, rising from her seat. The judge banged the gavel. "Miss Carter, sit down." Mark smirked. "Think what you want. But I've got the messages to prove it." He handed over his phone, revealing a series of texts between him and Lisa. Whether genuine or fabricated, they painted Lisa in a manipulative light. Confrontation. After court adjourned, Lisa confronted Mark in the hallway. "Why would you do this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. Mark leaned in, his tone mocking. "Because you used me, Lisa. And now you're paying the price." Before she could respond, John approached, his expression unreadable. "I don't care what games you two played," he said coldly. "I just want this nightmare to end." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "John, please, you have to believe me." But John walked away, his silence more damning than words. Resolution. The trial ended with a mixed verdict. The judge ruled that both John and Lisa had contributed to the toxic breakdown of their marriage. Mark's testimony, while damaging, lacked sufficient corroboration to sway the case entirely in his favor. John was awarded custody of Max and the house, while Lisa received a modest financial settlement. For John, it wasn't about winning, it was about moving on. In the days that followed, John began the process of letting go. He deleted the video from his devices, blocked Lisa and Mark on social media, and focused on rebuilding his life. Lisa too started anew. She moved to a smaller apartment, far from the memories of her past, and continued her therapy sessions. Though the scars remained, she resolved to learn from her mistakes and live with integrity. Final confrontation. Months later, John and Lisa crossed paths at a mutual friend's party. The encounter was brief but cordial. "How's Max?" Lisa asked, forcing a smile. "He's good," John replied. "He misses you sometimes?" Lisa nodded, her eyes glistening. "Take care of him, and yourself, John." "You too, Lisa," he said softly before turning and walking away. As the evening wore on, they remained on opposite sides of the room, both aware that some wounds never fully heal. But in that moment they found a semblance of peace, a fragile truce amid the chaos of their shared history. And so, with the final chapter written, they closed the book on their tumultuous story, stepping into separate futures shaped by the lessons of their past. As silence fell, the echoes of their choices lingered in the air. The aftermath of the trial had left John and Lisa forever changed. No longer bound by the invisible threads of a broken marriage, they had to rebuild their lives on their own terms. But the journey was not one of simple resolution. It was a complicated path of reflection, growth, and the painful acknowledgement of their own flaws. For John, the trial marked the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a long road toward healing. He had been betrayed not just by Lisa, but by his own assumptions and naivety. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be easily repaired, but it could be relearned. John found solace in the quiet moments with his son Max. With each passing day, he understood more about forgiveness, not for Lisa's sake, but for his own peace of mind. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic reconciliations, just small, deliberate steps forward. As he looked out over the city skyline from his new apartment, John realized that life was no longer about revenge or redemption. It was about finding balance and rebuilding the fragments of his soul that had been torn apart. He started a new routine, spent more time with his friends, and made sure to prioritize Max's happiness. The weight of the past still lingered, but the future seemed brighter with each day he chose to let go. For Lisa, the days after the trial were filled with self-reflection and self-repair. The reality of her own choices hit her harder than any courtroom drama. She had acted out of desperation, fear, and ultimately selfishness. Lisa often found herself alone in the quiet of her new apartment, questioning her own motives and the people she had hurt along the way. But there was a certain freedom in the aftermath. No longer shackled by the lies she'd told, Lisa sought to heal from the inside out. Therapy became an anchor for her, and for the first time in years she was able to confront her past without shame. Her road to redemption would not be easy, and forgiveness, if it came at all, was something she'd have to earn one step at a time. In a way, Lisa had learned the hard truth, that when trust is broken, it is never fully restored. But through honesty and vulnerability, she might one day rebuild her own sense of integrity. The conflict between John and Lisa had been deeply personal, but it also served as a reminder of the complexities of human nature. In their story, there were no absolute heroes or villains. Both had made mistakes, serious ones, but neither was beyond redemption. The journey to forgiveness, whether between them or within themselves, would be long, but it had begun. Their story wasn't one of grandiose victories or epic endings. Instead, it was a tale of quiet strength and painful lessons learned. The lives they had once built together could never be restored, but each was finding their own way forward. As they each turned the page to a new chapter, they understood one thing. Life was unpredictable, and sometimes the hardest lessons were the ones that shaped you the most. Their past would always be a part of them, but it didn't have to define their futures. In the end, the greatest lesson was clear. Every choice matters. Every betrayal, every lie, and every moment of weakness had consequences. But with every choice there was also the possibility for change, for growth, and for the chance to do better. And so, with a final glance back at the past, John and Lisa walked into separate futures, still marked by the echoes of their choices but free from the chains of their old lives. They would never be the same, but perhaps that was the point. In the end, it was not the mistakes that defined them, but the courage to move beyond them. Transition. Their stories were not over. But in that moment, they were no longer bound by the past. And the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. The past has a way of creeping back even when buried deep. For John, the world had seemed so simple before it all fell apart. A good job, a beautiful wife, and a son he adored. What more could he ask for? Yet beneath the surface, there were cracks he had ignored, signs he failed to see. It wasn't until the affair had been exposed that he began to question everything, not just about Lisa, but about himself. What had he missed? What had he been blind to in their marriage? One evening, weeks before the affair came to light, John found himself sitting alone in their living room. It was just after dinner, and Max had been tucked into bed. Lisa had said she was working late, a claim that was becoming more frequent as the months passed. John had trusted her, or at least he thought he had. But something about that night felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. It was while he was cleaning up the kitchen, distracted and lost in thought, that he saw something that changed everything. A text message from an unknown number flashed across Lisa's phone screen as it rested on the counter. Normally, John wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this time his eyes were drawn to the screen. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." His heart skipped a beat. The words stung more than he had expected. He turned away quickly, hoping to shake the feeling off. But it lingered. He couldn't help but replay those words in his mind, even as he tried to dismiss them. The next few days were filled with a quiet tension. John tried to push the nagging suspicion aside, but it kept resurfacing. Lisa had become more distant, and her work commitments were increasingly opaque. Something inside him knew that the text wasn't a one-time slip, but a glimpse into something far bigger. Yet he couldn't bring himself to confront her. Maybe he was too afraid of the truth, or too comfortable in the lie they had built together. Weeks passed, and John found himself grappling with a growing sense of unease. But the real turning point came when he installed the hidden cameras. It wasn't paranoia, he convinced himself. It was a way to catch her in the act, to finally have the answers he craved. What he saw that night on the footage was a brutal wake-up call. Lisa had come home late once again, her steps unusually quiet as she entered the house. The footage showed her pulling out her phone, checking it quickly before slipping into the guest room. A few moments later, a man entered. John couldn't make out his face, but his movements, his familiarity with Lisa, were unmistakable. The footage had no sound, but the body language between them spoke volumes. John felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath him. In the weeks that followed, John's thoughts were consumed by this revelation. He began to replay everything in his mind, the signs he'd missed, the small moments that now seemed so obvious. But there was one secret John had never shared, even with himself. A part of him had always known. Maybe not in detail, but he had always sensed something was off. His trust in Lisa had been more fragile than he had admitted, and his inability to face that truth had allowed him to stay in the dark for so long. It was in this state of confusion and anger that John remembered something from his childhood, a lesson from his father. You can't control other people, son. You can't control their actions or their mistakes. But you can control how you respond. John had always thought his father's advice was a bit too simple, a little too easy. But now, sitting in his new apartment looking at Max's empty room, the words made sense. He couldn't change the past, and he couldn't force Lisa to undo the hurt she had caused. But he could choose how he moved forward, how he would respond to the betrayal. Meanwhile, Lisa was confronting her own ghosts. The affair had started so innocently, at least that was what she told herself. She had never intended to hurt John. But somewhere along the way she had lost sight of herself and the life they had built together. She had convinced herself that the affair was about finding something she was missing. But what was it that she truly needed? It wasn't until the courtroom drama, after the affair had been revealed and the legal battle had begun, that Lisa realized how much of her life had been spent running from her own truth. She had kept the affair hidden not just from John, but from herself. She had avoided facing the deep-rooted insecurities and fears that had caused her to make such destructive choices. In a moment of self-reflection, Lisa remembered a conversation she had had years ago, before Max was born. John had asked her what her dreams were, what she truly wanted from life. At the time, Lisa had been too focused on the idea of having it all to answer honestly. She had answered with vague promises of a perfect future, but deep down she had felt empty, unsure of her own identity. That conversation so long ago was the catalyst for her gradual unraveling. She had wanted to be everything, perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect career woman. But in the process she had lost herself. The affair at its core wasn't about passion or desire, it was about Lisa trying to feel seen, trying to feel alive in a life that had gradually become suffocating. As Lisa sat in her apartment, reflecting on the path that had led her here, she realized how many choices she had made out of fear. Fear of facing the reality of her life. Fear of confronting her own vulnerability. Fear of disappointing others. And ultimately, fear of acknowledging the pain she had caused. But now, with everything out in the open, Lisa had no choice but to face the truth. She had to confront not just the affair but the reasons behind it. And she had to reckon with the damage it had done to John, their marriage, and the trust they had once shared. The secrets they had kept, the lies they had told, were now laid bare. Neither John nor Lisa could pretend anymore. The truth had come crashing in, and it was impossible to ignore. It was no longer about who was right or wrong. It was about understanding how far they had both fallen from the people they had once been, and the painful journey ahead to rebuild what had been lost. The truth had finally surfaced, but with it came a new set of questions. What would they do now? Help can come from the most unlikely places, or so it seemed. In the wake of the revelation, John was at a crossroads. His life, his family, and everything he thought he knew about love and trust had been shattered. Lisa, too, had been forced to confront the truth she'd spent so long avoiding. The tension between them was palpable, each moment more unbearable than the last. But it wasn't just Lisa he had to contend with. There were still many unanswered questions, and one of the biggest had yet to be addressed: the identity of the man in the videos. Days passed in a fog of anger, confusion, and sorrow. John had never felt more alone, yet he couldn't escape the thought of who had betrayed him. That's when the unexpected happened. It came in the form of a message. The number was unfamiliar, and at first, John thought it might have been a wrong text or some marketing gimmick. But when he read it, his pulse quickened. "I have information you need. It's about Lisa. Meet me if you want to know the truth." A cold shiver ran down his spine. Who was this person? How did they know about Lisa's affair? How much did they know, and what did they want in exchange for this information? It was a gamble, but John was too far gone to back out now. He had to know the full story, even if it meant walking into the unknown. The meeting was set for the next evening at a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. When John arrived, the place was nearly empty, save for a few elderly patrons and a young couple tucked into a corner booth. At first, he thought he might have been set up. His nerves were on edge as he scanned the room for anyone who looked suspicious. And then she walked in. Lena, a woman in her mid-30s with striking red hair and a confident, almost defiant posture. She had an air of mystery about her, the kind of woman who exuded confidence without saying a word. She looked directly at him, her eyes filled with something John couldn't quite place. Was it sympathy? Pity? She sat down without waiting for an invitation, her gaze steady on him. "You don't know me, but I know you," Lena began, her voice low and deliberate. "I know about the affair. I know who your wife's been seeing." John was taken aback, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected some vague explanation, but this woman seemed to know everything. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Lena took a deep breath, as if choosing her words carefully. "I want to make things right. I want to show you that not everything is as it seems." John's mind raced, but he held back. "What do you mean?" Lena leaned in slightly, lowering her voice further. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you the truth, things about Lisa that even you don't know. She's not who you think she is." For a moment, John was tempted to walk away. What could this stranger know that would change anything? But then a deeper curiosity gripped him. What if she was telling the truth? What if she had the answers to questions that had been tormenting him for weeks? "I don't know what you want from me," John said, his voice shaking slightly. "But if you're going to talk, then talk. I'm listening." Lena smirked, her eyes gleaming with something like amusement, or was it something darker? She began to speak of Lisa in ways that John hadn't expected. Details that only someone close to Lisa could have known. Her work habits, her insecurities, the very things she had kept hidden. "You think she was the victim of some love affair gone wrong," Lena continued, her voice rising slightly. "But it wasn't just about a fling. She's been involved with someone much bigger, someone who's been pulling the strings." "Lisa's been used, just like you?" John's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Who's been using her?" Lena's eyes flickered to the side as if considering how much to reveal. "It's not just an affair. There's more at play here. Your wife, she's not the only one being manipulated." The pieces of the puzzle that John had been trying to put together began to swirl in his mind. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about something deeper, something more dangerous. And suddenly, John realized that Lena's involvement wasn't as innocent as it had first appeared. "I don't know who you are, but I don't trust you," John said, standing up abruptly. "If this is just some game to you, I'm done." Lena's face didn't flinch. She had expected this reaction, perhaps. But before John could leave, she spoke one last time. "I'm not your enemy, John. I'm your ally. But the truth comes with a price. You need to decide whether you want it." Her words hung in the air as he walked away, the weight of her revelation sinking in. What was she really offering him? Was she on his side, or was this another layer of the twisted mess his life had become? Later that night, as John sat alone in his apartment, the gravity of Lena's words lingered. Could he trust her? Or was this yet another betrayal in disguise? The next day, as he struggled to make sense of it all, Lisa came to him with an apology, one that seemed heartfelt but still laced with guilt. She had no idea about the meeting with Lena, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. But John couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something hidden just beneath the surface. And Lena, whoever she was, had given him just enough doubt to make him question everything. The truth was becoming increasingly elusive, and John found himself on a path that could lead to redemption, or to even greater betrayal. Some choices leave scars no matter which path you take. John sat at the kitchen table, his mind a storm of thoughts. The mug of coffee in front of him had long gone cold, but he didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands tightly gripping the edge of the table. The words Lena had spoken echoed in his mind, a constant refrain that refused to fade. The idea that Lisa had been more than just a partner in an affair, she had been part of something darker, something he didn't understand, was too much to bear. But was it true? Could he trust Lena? His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Lisa. I know you're still upset, but I need to talk to you. Please come home soon. John clenched his jaw, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He wanted to believe Lisa, he wanted to. She had always been his rock, his partner, the person he thought he knew better than anyone. But now nothing seemed certain. What if she was lying? What if Lena's words were true, and Lisa had been manipulated? Could he forgive her, even if it wasn't entirely her fault? But what if Lisa wasn't a victim at all? What if she had been hiding something darker all along? Could he live with the truth if it meant facing the possibility that the woman he had loved for so long had deceived him on a scale he hadn't imagined? He stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. The decision was too much. His heart told him one thing, his mind another. But neither of them seemed capable of guiding him to the truth. The days had passed in a blur. He had tried to keep his distance from Lisa, but it was impossible to escape the tension that filled every corner of their house. The air felt thick with unspoken words and emotions that neither of them seemed willing to face. John had always prided himself on his ability to understand people, especially Lisa. He knew her better than anyone, or so he thought. Now it felt as if everything he knew was wrong. As the hours wore on, John's thoughts grew more chaotic. He couldn't stop replaying the meeting with Lena. Her calm demeanor, her certainty about things that Lisa had never shared. And yet, there was something about Lena's presence that didn't sit right with him. She claimed to be his ally, but how could he be sure? Her motives were unclear. What if she was just another person trying to manipulate him like so many others? John paced back and forth in the living room, unsure of what to do. Was Lena trying to help him, or was she using his pain to advance her own agenda? What if she wasn't on his side at all? The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. What if everyone had been lying to him? It was the first time the thought crossed his mind, and it felt like a heavy weight settling on his chest. What if Lisa wasn't the victim as he had hoped? What if she had been playing both sides, lying to him while pretending to be the loving wife he'd always known? He ran a hand over his face. The idea was unbearable. But then there was the flip side. What if Lena was telling the truth? What if Lisa was being controlled, trapped in a situation she couldn't get out of? John's eyes drifted to the photos on the mantel. There was one of Lisa and him at their wedding, smiling as if nothing could ever come between them. But now that image felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Suddenly the doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. He knew who it was before he even stood up. It was Lisa. He opened the door to find her standing there, looking small in the doorway. Her eyes were red, and she was clutching a small envelope. I wanted to give you this, Lisa said, her voice shaky. It's everything I've been hiding. The truth, all of it. John felt his pulse quicken, a mixture of dread and hope flooding him. He stared at the envelope in her hands, feeling as if this small piece of paper could either mend everything or completely destroy it. Please, Lisa whispered. Just read it. I've made so many mistakes, but I swear I never meant to hurt you. John hesitated. For a long moment he didn't know what to do. Could he trust her? Was this the truth, or another lie wrapped in sincerity? His fingers trembled as he took the envelope, feeling the weight of the decision pressed down on him. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said softly. Lisa's eyes filled with tears and she stepped forward, placing her hand on his. I'm sorry, John. I never meant for it to get this far. Please, let me explain everything. But deep down, John knew this wasn't just about Lisa anymore. It wasn't just about her mistakes. It was about him. His decision. What path would he take? His heart ached as he realized that no matter what he chose, the consequences would be far-reaching. No matter how the story unfolded, he would never be the same. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. He could choose to believe Lisa, to take the envelope and hear her side of the story. Or he could walk away, leave it all behind and try to move on with his life. But no matter what he did, one thing was certain. The scars would remain. Some choices leave scars no matter which path you take,